Welcome to Unit 5. So Unit 5, the focus of this unit are rejections of classical liberalism that happened in the 20th century. Thus far in the course, we have taken a look at how classical liberalism evolved, what were some of the changes that brought about its evolution, specifically during the times of the Enlightenment and such thinkers as Adam Smith. Then we looked forward in time and we looked at some of the responses to these ideologies. This unit, we're going to be focusing on complete rejections of liberal principles and liberal values. And we could keep in mind why and how would a group of people or a leader choose to reject principles of liberalism. So one of the major case studies we're going to be looking at is fascism in the 20th century. And we're going to talk about how fascism rejected principles of liberalism, specifically the principles of the rights and freedoms of the individual in response to or choosing over the collective. So the collective came first over the individual. That's something we're going to keep in mind as we move through this unit. So many nations and nation states throughout modern history have rejected liberalism. So including some indigenous peoples. However, Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany are two important historical examples for us because they both had very dramatic impacts on the upcoming events and the ideologies of the 20th and 21st centuries. Therefore, in this unit, we're going to examine the ideologies of communism as implemented in the Soviet Union and fascism as practiced in pre-Second World War Germany. The chapter issue that we're going to be looking at is to what extent is the rejection of liberalism justified? So in other words, why would a group of people choose collectivist principles over individualist principles? To what extent is it justified? And the two questions that we're going to be looking at are why did these ideologies that rejected liberalism emerge? What were some of the social conditions that brought about the emergence of rejecting principles of the individual? And how did ideologies that reject liberalism affect the citizens? So we have to remember in Unit 2, we saw this chart, and this chart was split into individualism and collectivism. And we also kept in mind that when we're thinking about liberalism, we should be thinking about the principles of individualism. So these principles are based on the primacy of individual freedoms. And the principles of individualism value the freedom and the worth of the individual, sometimes over the security and the welfare of the group or the collective. And on the left-hand side, we have the principles of collectivism, which is the opposite. They stand in opposition to the principles of individualism. So collectivist principles, they value the goals of the group and they value the goals of the common good over the goals of any one particular specific individual. So a natural transition then, as a rejection of liberal principles or individualist principles, is the rise of totalitarian political systems. So I have this quote here, and this quote is said by Benito Mussolini, who's one of the most notorious dictators in history. This is what he said as a way to describe totalitarianism. He said, everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. So in our minds, the state is the common good, the common people. So definitely we're looking here at principles of collectivism. So the two most influential ideologies that rejected liberalism were communism and fascism. And both of these utilize totalitarian forms of government. Totalitarianism varies in the way that it's done in its practice, But what it has in common that as a government system, it seeks complete control over the public and the private lives of its citizens. It attempts such control by creating a hierarchy and an organized society with a single political party at the top of the hierarchy, usually run by either one leader or a small elite or small group of people. In order to understand the difference between fascism as it happened in Hitler's Nazi Germany and communism that happened in Soviet times, we actually have to look at the social spectrum, because we've already discussed the fact that both of these forms of government are totalitarian. But what makes them different? Well, what makes them different is how they're responding to change. So we can consider totalitarian regimes as responding to what they see as dangerous and destabilizing changes within society. Actually, totalitarian regimes, or the leaders, they consider the existing society in need of a complete transformation. So this transformation may be considered radical or may be considered reactionary. In terms of ideology, the spectrum is based on change. So whenever we're thinking social spectrum, we should always be thinking about change. The left encourages change, so the radicals encourage change, while the right resists change. The end points represent the extremes that we have. What makes them both extreme is both of those sides are willing and sometimes needing to use violence to bring about their vision. The stances closer to the middle are less violent in their means of executing their vision. So on the one hand, we have the radicals, and the radicals are encouraging a new vision. They're encouraging something that's never been done before. So for example, we're going to be using the Soviet Union as a radical mode of government that wanted to bring about something like a classless society, which is completely new, has never been done before. Reactionary, on the other hand, we're going to be looking at Nazi Germany. So what's interesting about the reactionary form of government is that the reactionaries resist change, sometimes with violence, as we've mentioned, but the extreme right supports change when it means that this change is going back to how things were in the past. So in traditional times. So the reactionaries, they want to go backwards in time to a way that things were before that were great. And the radicals are looking forwards in time to something new that has never been done before. What is a radical? A radical is a person who favors an extreme basic change, is quite impatient, and would actually support a revolution or a complete overhaul of the system to bring about this change, no matter if it leaves the state in the term of short-term chaos. Another word for radical is the word revolutionary, which is why I chose this image here. So what is revolutionary about this image is instead of the young man here throwing a Molotov cocktail or a weapon of some kind, he is actually throwing a bouquet of roses, which is a forward-thinking, revolutionary idea. A reactionary, on the other hand, is someone who's wanting to go back in time because they believe that somewhere in the past of the country's history, there was this ideal of greatness that we should strive to return back to. So the image here is taken from Donald Trump's political campaign and his motto, "Make America Great Again." So that word "again" is actually a reactionary statement. someone who wants to retreat into the past and restore the old ways of doing things. That's a reactionary. Someone on the extreme end of the spectrum also is not afraid to use violence as a means to achieve this. So totalitarianism is definitely a collectivist-based political ideology where conformity to the state ideology is demanded and is achieved. So how do totalitarian states achieve this unification or conformity? The extensive use of propaganda, coercive power, and communications technologies ensure that totalitarian governments maintain a strict level of control over their citizens. So because conformity to the state is demanded in the totalitarian regime, how does this conformity exist? Well, through such things as forced youth participation in youth groups and in youth clubs. Also, typically there's a secret police that uses terror and fear through regulating the citizens. There is indoctrination that happens through education. There's a censorship of the media, and there is also a redirecting of popular discontent. So what that means is all the problems or the ills of a society is blamed on a certain group of people, and that's called scapegoating. Now that I've outlined the basic principles and the basic tenets of how a totalitarian regime functions, we can look forward to looking at some examples of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. So as we move forward in this unit, consider why the political system of totalitarianism has arisen. What were some of the aspects, the social change that was required for totalitarianism to be brought about? And what has happened to liberal values along the way? So liberal values, again, are values that are connected to the individual. In what way were those sacrificed for the collectivist values to now come into play?